Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Beyond the Wire podcast. I'm your host, Tim Keller. Along with me is my awesome co-host, Mr. Matt Disher. And we have a returning guest, Mr. Chris Newsome of RecruitMilitary. It is good to see you again, Chris.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you guys having me on again.
Absolutely. Matt, I wanted to touch base with you. I know you were doing some camping in or around Kentucky, I believe.
Listen, we went off grid. I like to say that because I like
You
the
have
way
your
it
cell
sounds.
phone with you?
We were off grid with our cell phone and
posting pictures of our locations.
You're right, and our cars' GPS systems and
Yes.
such things. We were in a beautiful spot in the Daniel Boone National Forest, right on part of the lake there, and it was actually eerily quiet out there. And when I say that, like there was nobody around, which to a lot of people that like to go camping, that probably sounds like the ideal place. For me, it was terrifying because I'm like, man, anything could happen to us out here and nobody would ever know it. And apparently there are bears too. I don't worry about the bears so much, but there were bears. And so, but we got out there and got some time. My son and I set up a tent. Yeah, we were with another family who lives on our street, my son's best friend and his dad. And so we set up some tents, did not expect it to be as cold as it got on Monday night, which was unseasonably cold at night. It got really foggy and damp outside. So my son and I ended up sleeping in the back of the 4Runner, which, by the way, is another great reason why this is my third 4Runner I've ever owned. They're just amazing. I dropped the seats down, jumped in there, started the engine, kept it warm, and we got
just like our forefathers.
Yes.
Just like our it's true roughing it.
Yeah.
And I'll
I think
say
that's
this,
called glamping, if I'm not
It is.
mistaken.
It is. But we did have tents and we had a bonfire and everything. One thing that I came unprepared with was I bought some sleeping mats and I bought some sleeping bags and some of the other essentials, but I kind of went cheap on those because I'm like, what if we only do this once or twice a year? I don't want to have all the gear. What if we get out of here? My son hates it, and then we don't ever want to do it again. I don't want to spend a ton of money on it. He loved it, even though we were freezing. He loved it and wants to do it again and again and again now. So now I'm going to invest in some better equipment, which will allow us to have a little bit better of a time. But we made do, just like back before modern amenities, we slept in the back of the 4Runner with the heat on,
Yes.
and it turned out to be a pretty good trip.
Yeah, I remember.
It's a great way to stay in shape.
I remember the late '80s, early '90s playing Oregon Trail, and it'd be time to rest. You just sleep in the back of your 4Runner, and then you'd go on, and somebody would catch pneumonia and die.
It was exactly like that.
Yeah.
Down to how we sourced food. We had to go kill it out of the cooler, and then put it on the propane grill.
Yeah, gotcha.
And cook it up right there in the field. And there was no waste, so no bones left behind or anything like that. We used all the material from the animals which we sourced, and there was no malaria either.
Yeah, very, very good. Very good. Absolutely awesome. So, as we like to do, we get into some news. Normally we use military.com, but we have an article from the Marine Corps Times here, a story we've kind of been just keeping our eyes on and talking about over the past few months. Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller has now infamously become a viral sensation with his videos demanding accountability from senior officials in the Marine Corps and other branches of the military due to the withdrawal from Afghanistan and what has happened since. So Lieutenant Colonel Scheller and his team of legal professionals went in. It was the sentencing. Essentially, he's had to give up 1 month of pay. He did spend, I believe it was 9 days in the brig. The lieutenant colonel is going to give up 1 month of pay. So it's about $5,000. He's going to be fined. It does seem like he will be discharged from the military now. He's either going to get an honorable or other than honorable under honorable conditions. So as it was all looking, this is a pretty solid outcome for him. What gets me is the judge really shot back at command, saying that this individual didn't seem like he was aggressive or harmful or threatened any sort of way. He was distraught and upset by what had taken place and was expressing his opinion, which was a valid opinion, according to the judge. And, the judge wishes that, the same thing, the same message that Lieutenant Colonel Scheller was putting out there. that somebody is held accountable going forward. So.
And I think that this is what we've talked about all along. There were two camps here. One, we all fully agree. He broke the rules, right? He broke the rules that the military had set forth. And those are rules that we all agree to, or officers agree to. However, on the other side of this, and I said this a long time ago, a lot of the attention it was getting was based on the punishment and the treatment of Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller. It was almost like if they wanted to brush it under the rug, they did the wrong thing by trying to brush it under the rug. I mean, in other words, if you wanted to brush it under the rug, they probably should have acknowledged his statements and what he was saying, and then his statements would not have become so profound. And that's just, it's like how social media works. You know, it's if it bleeds, it leads. You know, if somebody's being punished for speaking the truth, for example, or if somebody's being punished for saying something controversial, there's more media time. There's going to be more airtime. And perhaps that's what the judge was looking at here. If you look at it militarily, he broke the rules. It's the rules of wearing the uniform. However, if you look at it from the standpoint of constitutionally, he's not breaking any rules and shouldn't have been imprisoned. And I don't know, you can read all of the final judgment from the court on the topic online. There were a whole bunch of statements made by the judge. There's more to it than what we can discuss here, but the judge did kind of come back and say, hey, this probably shouldn't have been treated as harshly as he was.
Yeah. He was convicted under Article 88, Article 89, Article 90, 92, and 27 specifications under Article 133. So plenty of charges up against him. It came down to losing that $5,000 of pay. So overall, I would say, in this case, pretty much a win for Stu Scheller.
I am certain. I mean, going into this, and we've talked about this before too. He knew that this could have, how bad this could have become.
Yeah.
He knew that he was jumping into the fire, so to speak. And I would bet that he probably figured it would be a lot worse than it is. But at the very least, the conversation still remains that the military has to be accountable. Government leaders have to be accountable, no matter how you look at it. Again, from a middle of the road, unpartisan perspective, this is something we should all be asking for. It just depends on how we ask for it, I think was the theory, the theme of this whole conversation.
Yeah. And I think the judge thought possibly his commanding officers that brought these charges against him were trying to make an example out of him. And this just wasn't necessarily the case to try to make an example of somebody because, they had very good reasons to have these thoughts and feelings. And despite expressing them in probably not the most professional manner, he's allowed to have his opinions, and that is what it is.
This all unfolded in what they call the court of public opinion, too. Yeah, absolutely. He had some amazing support from the public. Yeah, and I think that's probably something else that needed to be taken into account. Court isn't always as easy as let's go sit down and discuss the facts. And I learned this in college because at one point in time I decided I wanted to go be a lawyer, and I figured out, courtroom work groups and things like that. And some of these conversations, there are deals happening behind the scenes. There are politicians getting involved in some cases, people saying, hey, let's rein this back in. And I realized that ultimately the judges have some of that power to pass the judgment, as is their title. But a lot of this stuff behind closed doors, they're probably looking at, well, what happens if we would have gone harsher? What happens if we would have given the command everything they asked for in this case? I don't know. I'd love to know what the back end of it looks like.
We'll only ever be able to hypothesize, but I think, he was facing, borderline martyrdom. He said what everybody was thinking. Yeah, he broke the rules, and it's important for everybody to appreciate the difference between civilian law and UCMJ. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is a completely different set of rules and laws that apply, exclusively to military personnel. So while you do have constitutional rights on the other side of the gate, to say and do a lot of things to express your opinion, it has to be in the appropriate context if you're doing that while in uniform. And he made those comments in his office, on base, in uniform, right. Derogatory towards leadership. Again, literally the wrong thing, but he did what everybody, he said what everybody was thinking. And I think that's why, he'll be, he's a hero or an anti-hero, depending on, what side of the stance you're looking at. But, I think my hypothesis is that, because he did it and it went so viral, it's all eyes on him. And if the Corps were to really throw the book at him and make a martyr of him, it would only further strengthen, the same sentiment and opinion that he expressed, and, start a proverbial fire, on whether it be social media, or it could have incredible political backlash. The military is, a force of defense for our country, but it's also an extension of our political leaders in some instances. So to throw the book at a guy like this that said what literally everybody was thinking, would be to, just further fuel that divide. So my hat's off to the judgment, that was bestowed upon him for making it relatively lenient, considering he could have had a decade of prison ahead of him if this thing didn't have the right amount of attention, or if it wasn't such a spectacle that it was. So yeah, I think there's a lot of silver linings here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chris, you nailed it on the head. If this was 20 years ago and maybe he had just sent a couple emails out to some other people in his command and some friends back home, and it went this far to trial, I don't think he's probably getting this lenient of a sentence. But because so many eyes were on this, he knew, like Matt said, and Chris, it's a great term you used, the martyr. He knew that he was possibly going to be martyrized because of this, that at the end of the day, he might face some serious time in the brig, and give up his freedoms to express these opinions. He knew going in.
I still stand by this too, that there was a lot going on here, that I think that certain people, social media, again, the court of public opinion, was trying to turn this into a political thing, which it was not. It just happens to be under one administration, but had this happened in the previous administration or the previous one to that, the fact remains, and I think Stu Scheller said this in the very beginning, he was like, did anybody throw their rank on the table and say this isn't a good idea, or we should do it, we should execute it differently, or whatever. The president doesn't make those decisions from their office. The president delegates that responsibility to military leadership. That's why it doesn't matter who the administration was. It was a thing that happened in this current military leadership environment. And I think the bigger piece of this is that, are these people military leaders or are they politicians? Or I know that they have to kind of play in both spaces. And of course, some of them are, they do shake hands and they sit on both sides of the aisle, as they say. They have to work along, they have to project political leadership as well. But when it comes down to lives in combat, you don't go execute a military operation based on political clout alone. If we go back in time to the generation before ours in combat, Vietnam era veterans will tell you, and the whole arguments and frustration of that generation were that Vietnam was, it looked like, a political conflict, and people were dying because of it. It was just over political control. And I think that some of your people who understand that history were looking at these events too, and have been fairly. They've been looking at Iraq and Afghanistan all along and saying, do we really belong there? Should we really be doing this? And then when it comes time to leave, did we execute the exfiltration the right way? So it tried to become a political thing, which it was not. And I think that's where it got a little bit of confusion. Frankly, had he sent an email to somebody, it would have been brushed under the rug and he probably would have been fired. So that goes for something too. That's still you can't just send an email and say, hey guys, I think you were wrong. It has to be brought to the light. And if it's so important, if it is such an important thing, just my opinion again, and I know I'm biased, Chris and I both knew Stu Scheller in high school, or we went to the same high school around the same years. Maybe a little bit of bias there, but at any rate, we teach our kids, I teach my son to speak the truth, even if he's trembling. You always tell the truth, and sometimes it's not going to be the popular thing. In this case, it was the popular thing, and that worked to his advantage. But I love this conversation. It was kind of unfolding before us over the course of the last few months, and I look forward to maybe having Stu Scheller on here one day.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And Matt, I think you made a great point there, that it really doesn't matter what administration was at the top of the chain of command at this point, because any president, let's be honest, none of them wear military uniforms, at least anymore these days here in this country. And, they have military advisors. So they decide, hey, we want to, get out of Iraq. They say that to their military advisors. The military advisors give those commands to the people in charge, and those people in charge are then delegated to figure out how to make those things happen. And maybe they went the right way, or maybe they didn't. So
I think you also bring up a good point, Matt, where we're just referencing general courage. Do the right thing. The same thing that I'm sure you tell your son is the same thing I would tell my son or my daughter. Have courage, tell the truth, because it'll be better than if you lie. It'll be better. And in this case, not lying, but silence. Silence could have been potential, and who knows if it was detrimental or what was accomplished as a result of this, or was this anything more than just the spectacle that it was of somebody taking a stand, somebody elevating their voice. We'll see. History will tell that in the long run.
Right.
But I think especially with the sentencing or the final verdict, this is a great example of where taking a stand and being courageous. It's going to benefit him in the long run. He's got more street cred than anybody else out there right now.
Right.
In uniform.
This is a country that was founded on rebellion. And we have to remember that too. While we're having these conversations, if you look at the history of this country, when people are like, "Hey, you should keep your mouth shut and not stir the pot," we were founded on stirring the pot. We were founded on telling people, "No, we're not going to do it your way. We're going to do it our way." And I think we have to remember that as mistakes happen. You see, local, like we're having an argument locally here in my community about something with our school district, and it goes back to wastefulness, and it goes back to people maybe in the past mismanaging resources and things like that. But at this point in time, we need some new resources. We need some new buildings. We need a levy to pass, and people are arguing and frustrated over this stuff. We are a country, we are communities founded on rebellion. You can't just settle for, hey, this is going to be the answer and I'll take it or leave it. You got to stick up for what's right. You got to stand up for what's right. People are violating HOA laws or HOA rules in their neighborhoods by putting signs in their front yards. And it's just amazing to watch it happen, because I think some people know it's the right thing to do, and we need these things. We need these resources for our communities, but we can't forget that the school board, or on a macro level, the government, is not necessarily in control of your destiny. And if it's the truth and it needs to be said, it needs to be said. So you're right, Chris. It's the same thing we teach our kids.
Absolutely. There are definitely lessons to be learned here. And I think that Lieutenant Colonel Stuscheller showed very, very strong leadership qualities here with this. Because, we've talked about it before. He's a very smart, intelligent man. He knew the possible, outcomes of this. And he still decided that, this is the right thing to do. So congratulations to him on having things kind of break his way there a little bit. So this next article we have pulled up, this one is from military.com. And for anyone that has served for the past 30, 40 years, so from the original Iraq invasion, Operation Desert Storms, through the latest events, there is now the National Veterans Legal Service Program, or NVLSP. It is a nonprofit veterans legal organization that is going to help individuals that are dealing with burn pit claims with the VA. So the VA has had thousands and thousands of claims turned in. In the article here, it does say a pretty, 240,000 members deployed during Operation Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, New Dawn, to 11 countries that include the Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea, have registered for burn pit claims. And I don't see, 75% have been turned down by the VA. So this organization's whole goal is to get that number much, much lower. 75% of individuals suffering from health defects, diseases, there's skin conditions, cancers, all these things that are stemming from these burn pits, are having all these claims denied by the VA. So if you or someone that is served is having adverse side effects from possible burn pit exposure, you might want to check this out. This is something that I think needs to be spread out there. We need to get the word out to individuals, especially that are dealing with these medical side effects from this. I think at the time, you have thousands of service members in these camps overseas. It is not right for us to just create trash and leave it necessarily. We have to do something with it. And this was probably at the time the best or easiest idea to use. But, the burning of the trash, plastics, I know during Operation Desert Storm and even the beginning of this last conflict, the oil wells were set ablaze. So they're saying that some of the smoke and inhalation from those is also causing some of these. I do believe that there are currently only 3 diseases that the VA is recognizing as burn pit related. But let's remember, like Agent Orange, it took years and years and years for those claims to go through. I want to say it's something like 11 or 12 diseases are now being like automatically sent through for Agent Orange exposure. So
some of those Agent Orange ones are being added to the list as of this year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, three this year got added to the Agent Orange list. So it's 17, not 11. 17 diseases are now on that Agent Orange list. So, if you or someone was exposed to these burn pits in any of these conflicts, this is an organization that could possibly help you, get your claim through and get the help that you're probably going to need. So I saw that and thought it was a little something we needed to get out there for everybody.
That's
obviously.
like, again, back in Vietnam, Agent Orange, it was to clear brush and things like that. It was like a chemical agent, and they didn't know, or they didn't think to know. Same thing with, I suppose that any of us standing around a burning pile of plastic and other stuff would probably be like, this probably isn't good for us, or we should have PPE. The funny thing is, in the military, everything we always did or still do was all safety. I mean, we would do helicopter dunkers. So you get strapped into a seat and get dunked to the deep end of a pool, and you have to figure out how to get out while you were blindfolded. And weapons training, it was, keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Yeah. All this safety stuff, safety. Obviously, when you go into combat, there's probably still safety precautions that you're taking into account, but you're getting shot at, right?
Yeah.
But burning stuff and having exposure to like breathing this stuff, we can't have beards and facial hair in the military because we have to be able to put a mask on, a gas mask on, or that's at least what they always told us. It's probably so that dudes couldn't be running around with,
looking like Hollywood.
Right. Yeah. Like long hair, don't care. But the fact is that they always said it was because of gas masks. But here we are stirring trash and burn pits, breathing in that stuff without proper PPE. I think it's going to still take a little while.
Yeah.
And I think another part of this is you probably have people that maybe never had exposure to this popping in there and saying, hey, I want some benefits too. So there's probably a process to go through, but historically, I think the VA has improved a lot in the post 9/11 generation, but there's still a lot of work yet to be done.
Well, you got to keep in mind, I think they're always playing catch up. Right. The military focuses on safety. You're operating in a zero fail environment, weapons training, being in whatever MOP level you're in for chemical training. It's tactical, though. It's for the threat that's immediately in front of you. Think of it like a 50-meter target as opposed to a 300-meter target. If this is something that's not going to have a negative impact until you're long gone and out of the military, I think, not that the military's, evilly giggling in the background, but they're preparing or training for what's immediately in front of us, the immediate danger, the immediate threat. We saw that with Agent Orange, and we're seeing it now with the burn pits. I remember being in Afghanistan or in Kandahar and running around the sewage waste pond. It was a pond where they emptied all of the facilities, and that was part of our run route. And to some of the the people leading the run, they thought like, oh, this will be fun. We'll make them. This is going to suck. This will make you harder, man. Not appreciating that maybe it's going to give you a respiratory disease in the next 10 to 20 years. Yes. So I don't know that we can necessarily say that anything nefarious was done. That kind of foresight was invested. With some of these poor thoughts, and burning waste with diesel gas, like probably not a great idea on a lot of different levels, but you do what you can when you're there with the assets that you have at your disposal, not justifying anything, making me think maybe I need to go submit a claim or something here. I got a little tickle in my throat every now and then, but might be more from cigars. So it's an interesting concept, but Matt, I think your point's great that the VA does a good job, but they're always trying to catch up, because these issues years or decades to manifest sometimes.
And it's millions of people. If you think about the post 9/11 generation, people who have been deployed overseas, it's millions of people. And if we go back in time to, let's call it 2004 or 2005, 2006, Chris, you and I sat on a congressional panel as subject matter experts. Was that in?
That's right.
That was in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'd have to go back and hunt, but that time frame sounds right.
We were still having conversations unrelated to burn pits or health problems, but we're still having conversations about how we best support, how corporate America and corporate partners and public-private partnerships can support post-military careerism. And that was just a few years ago. We're still having these conversations. There's still a lot of, I know I'm talking about jobs and careerism and things like that, but this was a panel of congressmen who were asking us questions about, like, what do we need to do? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? They're still trying to figure out how they pass legislation. You know, the same thing happened. We went into Iraq in 2003. We found that the vehicles that people were driving around in were severely under-equipped to deal with the current threat. We were coming out of a post Desert Storm era back then. You know, armor went to armor, and the Americans took out the Iraqi forces in the 90s in like 2 days. You know, there was no more armor on the ground. So it was soft skin Humvees and vehicles like that driving around. Well, suddenly we had IEDs on the side of the road. The combatants were no longer necessarily always shooting. They were fighting the passive measures through IEDs and roadside bombs and things like that. And we had to play catch up. The military was playing catch up at that moment. I don't think that they foresaw that we necessarily needed to prepare for that. Similarly, the VA is not a military organization. It's a government organization. It's in this case, it's a healthcare organization. What is the problem? How do we identify it? And how do we fix it? You're right, Chris. It's reactive. It's going to be reactionary for probably many years to come.
And identifying the problem is only the first step. You know, you've got a logistics machine to consider. You know, how do you incorporate the training? How do you validate the training, the remedies, you know, whatever it might be, and how, you know, what is the timeline and the actual logistics machine look like to roll it out and get it to all of those that are affected and to identify all of those that are affected. So, you know, I think it's easy for some people to bash their experience, you know, at the VA in particular in some cases, and I speak only for myself. I've had a great experience. You know, they have a dedicated OEF OAF clinic here in Cincinnati, and you know, they really took care of everything that I would have needed. I'm not without, and I have no gripes. But you know, we're talking about timelines. You know, we were talking on that congressional panel years ago. You know, imagine the Vietnam guys that are still trying to get that care. You know, 40 years, you know, plus later. You know, it's just the nature of the beast. That's what happens when you scale things to this level and it's managed by a bureaucracy or by a government. It's only so efficient, you know. So it's really hard to tell somebody that's waiting for care or that's, you know, in a very bad place health-wise, to tell them to be patient. That's not realistic.
And I think,
but it's kind of the world we live in.
I think the Vietnam era the Vietnam veterans in the United States did a lot to progress what we currently experience as
absolutely.
Yeah, they suffered to our benefit for sure.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And they're still fighting. They're still fighting that fight. But if you go back again, historically, if you go back in time to our previous major conflicts, you know, I'm not even gonna go back further than the 1900s, but World War I, World War II, even Vietnam, like they just said people were shell shocked and coming back and you were just sick and hey, thanks for your service. And that was what led us. I use the term shell shocked because I'm reading books about World War I, World War II. They couldn't identify things like PTS. They just didn't know, like there was no sort of identification of that. It was come home and just get back to work. You'll be fine. And it's not always that easy. And so I think this conversation again it's a continuation of everything that's happened historically in the United States. You know, these are things, I talk about this all the time. These are things that then become recruiting ads in and of themselves for people to join the military. If people are properly taken care of and everybody's landing a good job after the military, when we talk about Skill Bridge, for example, people are landing good jobs after the military and they have resources to go land good jobs and pay their bills and have nice houses and cars and support their families and things like that. And they get good health care. You're not going to have a problem getting people to join the military. If those things are adverse, then nobody's ever going to want to join.
Absolutely. And Matt, just another term for you. You use shell shock. Battle fatigue is one
Battle
of these.
fatigue, right? There was a General Patton who, I think it was General Patton, who slapped a soldier on the head and told him to get back out there, and he got reprimanded for that. And I think he changed his ways, but that was a famous iteration of, this lack of understanding.
Yeah, and I don't know when the term PTS was coined, when it was introduced into this sort of context, but I remember hearing the reference of battle fatigue as recently as like 2003.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was being used in the appropriate way, but again, we were in Afghanistan. The battalion was divided. Each company had their own primary mission, and there was one that had seen a little bit of action, and they were getting a break. Their cycle was taking a week off so another company could come in as the contingent to carry on with the mission, and it was referred to as battle fatigue, and we really didn't understand what that meant at the time. We're just like, what do you mean? You guys are like sleepy? Get up. There's more to do. So
tired.
yeah, culturally it takes a lot to or it takes time, I think, for us as a society to really get on board and to understand what it is and to avoid the General Patton, which is, I'm trying to see where I am on my
that's right.
camera here.
Yeah.
What makes the green grass grow? Patton's an idol of mine, but he's a very hard man, and those were very hard times. Not that things are easy now, but it was a different mindset. Nobody, mental health was in its infancy stage. At that point,
they didn't know. They had no idea.
You don't know what you don't know, and I think it's always going to be an ever evolving landscape. Unfortunately, we're going to have more conflicts. It's just the nature of humanity. And I'm sure, I don't look forward to it, but there's going to be another ailment that's chasing the next generation, whether it was Agent Orange for the Nam guys, whether it was, the burn pit or the hearing loss lawsuits, all this and that, that's out there for our generation. There's going to be something else. There'll be some new weapon system that radiates something that's going to give us, bladder cancer or something terrible. Who knows? But that's just that's just the nature of the beast. The military is a environment for research and development sometimes, and they do, they try new things, they try new tactics, new weapons, new, just new ways of operating or existing within the battlefield. And sometimes you got to move fast, and you don't have time to invest that foresight into, all right, what could the chain reaction be in 10 to 20 years? Do we have research? Do we have data that could guide us with our decision making? Sometimes we just don't have that luxury, and that's the collateral damage of it. It sucks, but it is.
That's the nature of conflict. You can plan and plan and plan, but then when you actually step foot, boots on the ground, and you're face to face with the enemy, and you have to be in remote places burning trash, or trying to, Agent Orange, trying to wipe out forestry so we can tell where the bad guys are moving equipment and things like that. Yeah. Who knew? Right.
And that's what an interesting Achilles heel. Trash removal. It's something we see every single week. We drag our trash cans out to the curb or the end of our driveway, and it's removed. But, I like to go like social psychological here, think about like, what would happen, like the state of nature that would happen if all of a sudden there was no trash collection. If everybody's just, figure it out. You gotta do away with your trash. And you're overseas and you're fighting, and you don't necessarily have that sort of logistics machine, trash removal as a service. So what are they going to do? They're going to bring in some locals. They're going to grab whatever materials they have, diesel gas, put it in a big pit, try to put it far away from where everybody's tents are. And we deal with the problem like that and cross our fingers and hope for the best.
Absolutely right.
And it sounds so rudimentary, but that's just the way it is sometimes.
You're right.
Chris, that company that was, dealing with some battle fatigue, if they were sleepy, they could just got up and took a lap around that waste pit you were talking about. That woke them right up.
Go get some fresh air. That's what you
go take a couple laps. Let us know how you're feeling,
man. Yeah.
Did anybody ever challenge the group, like last one in the pit, it's a rotten egg? Last one in the swimming pool?
No, we didn't have any swan dives into that particular pond, but I think there was probably some just sadistic, squad leaders or platoon leaders out there that were going to see how many laps they could do before people started throwing up. But
well, and, to your point about being in conflict, like who would have thought trash gets collected every week. My trash cans are sitting on the driveway right now, and the garbage truck came today. I went camping over the weekend, as I told you guys when we were setting up here. And it's glamping, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing though, because there's bears where we were, and they said like all of your trash and food has to be in sealed containers and then put inside of hard top vehicles. So you can't like leave it in the back of your truck while you're sleeping because it'll attract bears. It's amazing how much trash we generated as 5 people out there. 3 children and 2 adults. We were filling trash bags full of stuff, and there was stuff sitting everywhere at some point in time. Now all the cardboard and paper got thrown in the bonfire. But that even represented just a ton of things from just 5 people in basically 48 hours. There were no trash cans around. We just had trash bags. So
can't bury it, you
right,
burn
right.
it in that case.
Oh, and that's the other thing. So when people are going to the bathroom, the rules are you gotta be away from 100 feet away from any water source or the lake or the pond or the stream or whatever. That you have to bury anything that any of your bodily waste 6 inches or deeper, and you have to bury it all. And so, I'm telling my son this is the first time he's ever gone to the bathroom in the woods away from a toilet, and he thought that was the funniest thing in the world. But it's one of those things where, oh yeah, I mean, you have toilets, and like, we've never done this before. You never had to pick up your own trash and dig holes to go to the bathroom and things like that. Yeah. But it is absolutely clean water is another one that I think we take advantage of. We take for granted having clean water, being able to turn the tap on and have clean water that doesn't have diseases in it. I've been to countries where kids had to use their hands and whatever else they could find to finish going to the bathroom, if you know what I mean. There wasn't toilet paper. Kids didn't have shoes, just things like that.
And we're talking about, like burn pits and, disposing of trash in that, rudimentary manner. And I think it's important for anybody that's listening that maybe didn't go through the experiences that we're talking about. It's not just the military doing this as an impromptu solution, relative to the wherever their FOB or their base is. That's the way that the locals deal with their trash too.
Absolutely,
anybody that's been in very modern day third world, Afghanistan is a couple centuries behind most of the rest of the world, but even in Iraq, even in you look at places like Haiti, look at places like India, some quasi-developed, areas of the third world, they burn all of their trash, and it's not the solution, but that is what they do. So it doesn't normalize it or anything, but it's a pretty big issue. We're thinking about how we're being affected right now from being exposed to that for a short period of time. I always, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering about what about the people that grew up, living like that for, decades, what do their health conditions look like?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. This is speaking of, on our way back from this camping trip, we were out in some pretty rural parts. My son would make note of all the houses that had trash and old junk and garbage in their front yards. And although it didn't cross my mind that they're probably not necessarily, perhaps trash collection isn't the same out in some of these remote parts. It's the same thing. These people are burning piles of stuff in their backyard all day long, and they don't have the same ability just to get rid of things. It's happening here in our own backyards. It's here in the United States as well. Or it's just too expensive to have trash collection in some places. So.
Well, since we're talking about burning stuff, there was a fire on a naval ship back in July of 2020. The USS Bonhomme Richard caught fire, was set ablaze for 5 days. There has now been a 400-page report obtained by the Associated Press listing 36 officers and sailors whose failings either directly led to the ship's loss or contributed to it. This is a sailor that committed arson, set something on fire upon the ship. But the actions of the commanders of the ship and the delayed reaction of everybody else upon the ship led to the ship burning for 5 days and the loss of the ship. So the inability to extinguish the fire, the report said, and there was repeated failures, inadequately prepared crew. So that is where the commanding officer of the ship, this report is saying that these commanding officers did not have a crew that was prepared for a fire upon this ship. And Matt, I know you spent some time on a naval vessel. This is a big deal for people out there in the Navy. If you're in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific or wherever you are in the world, there is nothing around for hundreds of miles. If something happens on the ship, everyone on that ship has a job to do, and they need to be prepared to do it at any time to save not only themselves, but everyone else on board that vessel. because if a ship catches fire and nobody's there, nobody knows how to put it out, that ship's going to sink in the middle of the ocean because no one knew how to do their job.
And people are going to get killed and equipment's going to get destroyed. And the fire department is you. If you're on that ship, the fire department is you. Every sailor in basic training learns the basic fundamentals of shipboard firefighting. So
They
any sailor, anybody who's gone through Navy boot camp, anybody and everybody has been through the basic fundamentals of shipboard firefighting, because to your point, you can't just dial 911 and pull into a port. Same thing I say about like the machinist mates and electricians mates and things like that on ships. When you're at sea and something breaks, you don't just pull into a port and have it repaired. You have to fix it right then and there if it's a fundamental component. It's the same thing with a fire or an emergency or a medical emergency or what have you. I don't know the conditions of this ship. I realize that it may have been docked and it may not have been ready for, I don't know if it was undergoing some overhauls or some sort of maintenance. At any rate, the ship catches fire. When I first saw this on the news a couple of years ago, I was mind blown that there's this ship with just tons of smoke pouring out of it. Like, it reminded me of the images you see of World War II after like kamikaze attacks or ship bombings, where the whole ship is on fire and there's 1,000 guys trying to put it out. So somewhere along the lines, it sounds like there was some sort of breakdown in operational readiness. And I see a thing in this story where somebody failed to push the button to activate the foam system.
The report slams the commanders of the amphibious assault ship for poor oversight and said that the main firefighting foam system was not used because it had not been maintained properly and the crew didn't know how to use it. Those are two huge mistakes.
Right.
The report described a ship in disarray with combustible materials stacked and scattered and stored improperly all across the ship. It said maintenance reports were falsified and that 87% of the fire stations on board had equipment problems and had not been inspected.
Yep. Ultimately comes down to the boss. At any rate, even if it were the engineering team who was responsible for that, if you've spent time in any branch of the military, the commanding officer is ultimately responsible for the group's readiness. And if you show up to combat or you show up to a training exercise and you're shooting people in the back by accident and having all kinds of problems, the commanding officer gets fired. That's the way it goes. But you can't have a ship.
Go ahead. It took up to 10 minutes after the fire was discovered for the bells to be sounded and to alert other sailors to try to help put out the blaze. Those crucial minutes, the report said, caused delays in the crews putting on fire gear, assembling hose teams, and responding to the fire. The three leading commanders on the ship, you had the commander, the executive officer, and the head chief on the boat, all were charged.
Yep.
So
it's crazy.
Yeah, not a good look for the Navy there. You lose a very, very expensive piece of equipment because a lack of training and preparedness.
I'd say this also, and having spent time on ships and having known and worked alongside of a lot of people in the Navy and every other branch, I'll still say this, that they're among the most talented, smartest, most prepared men and women in the world. And so, like anything else, this gives it a black eye, but I still do think that operationally, you take any one of these ships out in the water, and this is an amphibious assault ship. It typically carries Marines and sailors and Marine aircraft and combat aircraft and things like that. In a real combat environment, the reason why this is so important, when it's docked, this fire broke out and the whole ship is now a disaster. A couple of reasons. If you look at the way a ship's designed, you should be able to close the hatches, and like it's all metal and things like that. Like you want to contain the fire and then put it out. And I am not a firefighting expert by any means, but you also want to make sure that happens at sea, that you have all of your stuff compartmentalized, chemicals, and that your systems, your fire suppression systems, are working. For the point you made, Tim, you have to be combat effective. And if you're on your way to war and or the enemy attacks you and something catches fire, you can't just be like, well, we couldn't put it out, so now we lost. I mean, there were ships that were bombed in World War II in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that they saved and salvaged and continue to run operations through. So you have to be able to manage the effectiveness of the ship. And it comes down to, like, you have the most capable men and women in the world on those ships. They just need to be trained properly.
Yep, absolutely. So, Chris, I want to spend some time getting into you and what's going on with you and what's new with Recruit Military. So, we kind of talked a little bit before we went live today.
what do we think the outlook for veteran jobs going forward is going to be? There's possible downsizing in the military. We're not currently at any sort of conflict. So what do we expect for an influx of talent coming out of the military, and what does that mean for military jobs going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of loaded because there's so many variables. We've got a unique employment environment right now where, once again in recent history, we find ourselves with more jobs than we have job seekers. You can't drive down any road without encountering a handful of signs that say help wanted, now hiring at whatever the rate is. I saw a sign from McDonald's. I mean, this was on social media. I don't think it was doctored, but offering $21 an hour, for certain positions. And whether it's temporary or long term, I think it bodes well for the job seeker themselves in that what we're seeing right now, aside from the economy trying to creep its way back and we're seeing an influx of jobs in some sectors, it's not because more jobs are being created. What's happening more than anything else is that there's like a mass resignation. They're literally calling it the Great Resignation. And I think you have a lot of, and this isn't just military veterans, this is anybody that's got a job, anybody that's, whether it's a career, whether it's a job, people are starting to shift their priorities just a little bit. Not that work is not important, but that the circumstances around work need to be more preferred in some cases. They don't want to grind it out and work themselves to death for minimum wage, for example, or to have to take, a second shift or a second job to make ends meet. There are people that are basically drawing a line in the sand and saying, we expect more. Some of it is valid. Some of it is maybe a little bit of undeserved entitlement, depending on what we're looking at as far as a candidate goes. But generally speaking, companies are being more competitive. They have to compete with each other in order to not just hire, but to retain their current talent. We're seeing a lot of individuals that are being poached from a like organization to come and work for another, apples to apples company doing the same job, but potentially getting compensated more, or to be given flex hours, better perks, better benefits, whatever the case might be. So it's a good time to be in the market, generally speaking. And I think we're going to be able to ride this wave for a little bit, whether that's 6 months, a year, or 2 years, I don't know. But it doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon. Unemployment rate amongst the military community, in the nation is about 3.9. So we're continuing to kind of dance around that mid threes, close to 4 number over the last couple months, which is not bad, relative to considering we're a full percentage point above our non-military job seeker counterparts that are out there. So considering, you were talking earlier about, hey, what a great recruiting tool it would be when, the military can celebrate that, hey, by virtue of serving in the military, you're going to get a good job. You're going to be taken care of. VA is going to square you away on healthcare and things like that. I think the unemployment rate kind of lends itself to that narrative a little bit. Right now we're talking about 96% of every veteran that's out there that wants to work is working. And, you've got the 4% that are still, working in that direction. But the vast majority, almost everybody with veteran status has a job right now. And I think that speaks volumes for the talent that they represent, and that corporate America is finally having some of the wake-up calls or the epiphanies, understanding that this isn't about flag waving. If anybody started their military hiring initiatives because it's the good thing to do, or these men and women stood on the wall and defended freedom, that's fine if that's where you started. But we've come so far since then. There's data that supports they outperform their colleagues, that they're easier to retain, and some of those really important metrics when you're looking at a company and their hiring and retention strategy. So all around it's a good environment to be a job seeker coming from the military community. With the end of the conflict in Afghanistan and no longer in a direct conflict in Iraq, so to speak, I don't think it represents a mass exodus, because I think it's important for us to remember how few troops we actually had in those theaters just over the last couple years. The formal withdrawal from Iraq was 2011. Obviously, we sent, a lot of special operators and the top tier war fighters over to intervene, with the conflict with ISIS and, jumping back and forth from Iraq to Syria. There are still active theaters of combat that we're operating in. So I think it's always important to remember that while we're not fighting a full-blown war all the time, we have troops stationed in Niger. We have troops in certain parts of Latin America. We have troops that are stationed at installations abroad. So we still have to maintain that troop presence, so to speak. So I think there might be a quasi downsizing of the military, only because politically we tend to see that, depending on which parties are calling what shots. But even if there is a downsizing, I don't think it's going to be a mass exodus per se. And again, the most unfortunate part about all of this is there's going to be another conflict at some point, and the military is going to have to beef itself back up. So we go through this kind of like this weight loss yo-yo game,
right?
Where we trim a ton and we get lean. And then all of a sudden we need to pack on some pounds for the winter, to hibernate. And then we're going to bring them back in and train up and build up the forces again. So
that's what I'm doing right now. I'm packing on the pounds for winter. By the way,
just Matt's getting ready to hibernate.
You got to be safe, man. I get it.
Well, and I think a point of this though is that the military will still transition for businesses, because I've been asked what prompted this conversation before we started recording today was, the people think that the conflict in Afghanistan is over now and Iraq ended years ago. Does that mean that we don't need these programs in corporate America? Do we not need to attract these men and women anymore? My argument would be U.S. military is still producing the most skilled, talented, educated men and women in the world, and they'll still continue to pump out 200,000 or more of those men and women leaving the service every year. So this is still a renewable resource of talent that companies should very well be engaged with. But to your point, Chris, there's always going to be another conflict. There's always going to be something else, whether it's in a year or 10 years or 20 years. They called the time between Vietnam and 9/11 the long peace. I forget what the actual time frame was, but it was the long peace. It was like the longest period of
Desert Storm somewhere in there in the middle. But
and Desert Storm was, for all intents, it was a large conflict, but it was executed on a very quick scale. It was very fast. It was a rapid in and out, and it was fighting a military that thought they had it all put together. And then we came in with our modern technology and wiped them out in days.
And I also think that we have to ask ourselves, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Because that's where a lot of this started, with trying to solve a problem. And that problem was, if you rewind back to around the 2008-2012 timeframe, when the housing bubble burst, we had an economic downturn, unemployment in the double digits, especially when we started getting granular with certain demographics within the military community, the younger ones, which were, us when we transitioned, we did our 4 to 8 years. That's the most average, enlistment term, and the majority of the military is enlisted. So we had all these guys and gals that were getting out. And for that particular age demographic, it was, 26% in some markets was unemployment. It was repulsive. And it wasn't because they weren't good candidates or that corporate America didn't need talent. It's because there was a communication gap. They didn't understand how to translate their skill sets. Corporate America didn't understand what they had in front of them as far as a candidate or talent goes. So we started building these military hiring initiatives, and at RecruitMilitary. And Matt, you with some time that you spend here, that we reach out to these organizations and help them establish these military hiring initiatives. And while it may have started because we were trying to stem a problem, we've had enough years and we now have enough data to support that. Again, we can get away from the patriotism and flag waving. These are not damaged goods. These are not individuals that, are charity cases. These are top tier representatives of, the talent pool of America. And I don't think that problem's ever going to go anywhere as far as a company needing to hire top tier talent.
Right.
Regardless of what it's going to be. If you're looking for, a leadership feeder program where you want to groom, your next group of VPs, directors, whatever the case might be, you're always going to be fishing with dynamite in the military community.
Right.
But, the data that again supports that these men and women are going to stay longer. They're retention's a little bit easier, their ability to get the job done, and exceed your expectations. Like, who wouldn't want more of that? So I don't think that's going anywhere. And that's what we've been able to accomplish over the better part of the last decade, is to deliver that to corporate America. And as that translates over to the military, as far as, how robust TAP is right now, and SkillBridge, and these new programs and all this great stuff that they're introducing to streamline and make transition better, it translates very well to the work that they're doing, if that's benefiting that company that's out there, because that company, is going to pay their taxes, and it continues to fuel the machine, the economy. It's a very, everybody wins if we do this right. So regardless of where we stand with conflicts, regardless of the current size of the military, or potential downsizing or growth, regardless of that fluctuation, I don't think the business case to continue to maintain these military hiring initiatives and build upon them is anything other than a great thing to do.
Right. Chris, you mentioned something before. We had a translation problem, that it was people leaving the military and we didn't quite know how to plug them into corporate jobs and things like that. And I want to ask you this for the sake of a sound bite and for sake of illustration there, because all three of us had combat related jobs in the military. You're a senior VP of your title is DoD partnerships?
DoD programs. Yeah.
Okay. DoD programs. What would your resume have said when you left the military? If you were coming to apply for a job right now, what was your resume?
Very, very different. But at the same time, with the grain of salt, I wouldn't have been qualified for what I do now at that point in time. But with that said, I was Army. I was a grunt. And for anybody that's not Army, it's 11 Bravo. That was our MOS. And I was a junior non-commissioned officer, but I didn't even know how to celebrate that. I didn't even know how to celebrate that I had management experience. I had led team size elements. I'd even led squad size elements in some instances. So my resume was kind of bare bones and overly general, to the point where the best gig that I could get was the first gig that I got. And that was, stacking pallets wearing a hairnet, very far cry from leading patrols in Iraq and being in charge of personnel, millions of dollars of equipment, and mission success. It's a huge thing that we run into. And again, fortunately, TAP has really stepped things up, and there are a ton of resources and time dedicated to each one of these men and women to try to make them celebrate their own marketability a little bit better than maybe we did and previous generations when we first got out. But I think all of us on this call right now are, kind of examples of where it doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't matter. You're not siphoned or siloed into a singular work category based on what you did while you served. You did what you served because that was the capacity in which you wanted to serve. It's not necessarily indicative of what you do moving forward. And we've got, healthcare MOSs, IT MOSs, engineering MOSs. Sometimes those are really easy to transfer, over to the civilian side. And should that individual maintain that passion for that line of work, it's a little more streamlined. But, combat arms and a few others in particular, it does get tricky to make that translation, and that translation is the communication. And if there's a breakdown in your ability to translate, you're going to have a breakdown on your recruiter's ability to read your resume and understand how you're a fit for that role. So a lot of resources out there. I strongly encourage, anybody that hasn't civilianized their resume to really invest the time to consider doing so. Get a mentor.
Absolutely.
We work with ACP. ACP is just the best mentorship entity that's out there right now. They're going to put you in with another like item. If you want to go into the financial sector, even if you haven't worked in the financial sector before, they're going to pair you up with somebody within that space that has a leadership oriented role so that they can really give you best practices. It's directly from the horse's mouth. And that's the path of least resistance that I typically recommend for anybody. You can get books, you can go online and try to do a literal one-for-one translation, but I would caution you against that in some cases, because an MOS code translator is just going to pigeonhole you into doing something exactly like what you did. And if you don't want to do exactly what you did before, maybe consider avoiding that, or at least take it with a big grain of salt.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you brought it up a couple times over the past couple of minutes, and I'm reading one of your posts from 5 days ago on LinkedIn where it's talking about right now is an important time for any organization to review their hiring. And this is what I want to bring up, the retention data. You've brought up that, veterans, the data shows we are easier to retain. We stay longer
in our jobs than, you know, our civilian counterparts. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about this retention and how important is that right now? I think it's possibly the most important thing out there for companies.
Yeah. It's an expensive topic too.
Yeah.
You know, if we're talking about a company, if you have a revolving door, you're spending money on training, on materials, on whatever your onboarding process looks like. So if you're having to onboard and offboard people at a cyclic rate, you know, you're hemorrhaging money. You're just leaving so much money on the table. Instead, it's a matter, and it's tricky right now. You know, I'm not trying to oversimplify this, that, you know, corporate America just doesn't get it. It's tricky because you know, take the current space that we find ourselves in, where there are more jobs than job seekers. Recruiters are desperate in some cases. They
Yep.
need bodies in those positions in some cases, and they're willing to settle, unfortunately. You know, again, great for the candidate that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been considered a couple years ago for that role, that now they can by virtue of the demand. But it also lends itself to putting a square peg into a round hole. You're forcing something that isn't a natural fit, and naturally, you know, you're going to have a retention issue eventually. So when we're talking about military personnel, one, there is just general data that supports that virtue of loyalty. You know, I'm not saying that a veteran is going to take a job that is terrible and they're going to stick with it because they don't know how to spell quit. You know, that's not the case at all. They're going to be loyal and they're going to give it as much time and energy as it's worth. But at the same time, if it's not a fit, they will leave. You know, the average military, you know, job seeker is going to leave that first job within 18 months on average, because they get out, they get a taste of the waters, and then they move on to something else that's a better fit for them. So one of the other reasons why, aside from that loyalty, why military personnel are going to be a better fit, they're more mature candidates in a lot of cases, and they're going to go for a job that is a fit for them. You know, being matched with the right job is a huge piece of this. Not just getting any job, but the job that's the right fit for you. These men and women want to get behind a mission. If your organization has a solid mission, you're going to be able to attract solid talent that can get behind that mission. So, you know, retention is elusive for some organizations because they focus so much on just recruiting in general that they haven't considered the culture, or you know, considering, are we forcing the wrong candidate into this role, you know, as opposed to maybe they don't have the luxury to take the time to find the perfect candidate. But, you know, it's a volatile topic, but it's an important one. So for any organization that doesn't have their head fully wrapped around their retention, or if you do and that retention data doesn't bode well, you know, for the bean counters, you know, you really want to consider digging in and identifying, you know, what is your recruiting and retention strategy relative to sub demographics like the military pool. So yeah, I know that's kind of all over the place, but yeah, it's an interesting topic because companies need retention just as much as they need hiring. If you hired 100 people this year, but you only kept 15 or 20 at the end of the year, did you really succeed?
No,
You know, that's what they need to be asking themselves right now.
Right.
Absolutely not. So we're getting ready to wrap up. And I just wanted to say, first off, last week we actually recorded on the U.S. Navy's birthday, and I didn't even mention it. So my apologies out there to all the sailors, you know, of years past and current, man.
But no sailors jumped into our chat here while we were live and said anything about it. Whereas
that means they're okay. That means they're not offended, I think.
Right. Well, and if we were to do that on the Marine Corps birthday,
let's be honest, nobody forgets that day.
Well, we're not going to forget that. But let's
be in the brig.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Marine Corps does, like, it's unlike the other branches. Like, we act like it's our own birthday and we go out and act like a bunch of fools and stuff. But that's because the Marine Corps was founded in a bar. Yeah. And that's just the nature of the beast.
I don't normally do anything for my personal birthday. I will always at least do one thing for the Marine Corps birthday. You know, it's just that thing. Also, before we get out of here today, did want to say General Colin Powell has passed away due to complications from COVID-19. He lived to 84 years old. He had a nice long life, was a very influential figure for over 40 years in the military, in the political spectrum. You know, I want to say he was one of the first African-American generals in the US Army. Fantastic leader by all accounts from anyone that's worked with him. great human being. I know he was a father, a grandfather, husband, and he will be missed. Influential individual. I can't remember how old I was the first time I heard his name, but I know I was just a wee little guy way back when. So rest in peace to General Powell. So that is going to wrap us up for this week. Again, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. You and all your counterparts over there at Recruit Military, just keep doing that awesome work you guys are doing. Keep putting these veterans and people looking to become veterans into these awesome professional roles and finding that success, because the job market out there needs all these veterans. They need them working more than anywhere else. You mentioned it. You drive a mile down the road and past 10 businesses, 6 to 7 of them are having a sign outside that says now hiring. Walk-in interviews right now.
That's right.
The job market is very weird. Very weird.
It is. It'll normalize eventually, but I appreciate you both having me on once again, and always honored to be a guest.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Arthur Ramirez served with him over in Camp Pendleton. Good to see you, Art. So everybody check us out on all social media platforms, all the major social media platforms. You can check us out there, as well as all your podcasting platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can probably find ours. Tell a friend, tell a relative, tell another veteran. Let them know where you heard us. We would appreciate that very much. So until next week, we'll be right back here on Beyond the Wire.